Hello, this is Mete Yurtsever. Today, the formula for creating value reaches out to Melbourne, Australia. And my special guest is Bri Williams. Thank you, Bri, for being with me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Bri Williams is a behavioral specialist. And I watched Bri's presentation on Nudgestock and the world's leading festival of behavioral science and creativity organized by Ogilvy. You had a brilliant presentation, Bri, and the sticky date problem. Okay, I won't spoil the surprise. I urge everyone to go and watch it. I'll post the link in the show notes. But I also have a memory of sticky date pudding. I was living in and working in Belgrade in Serbia back in 2006, and there was an Australian couple, half Serbian, half Australian actually, and they had a family-run restaurant, and they had quite unusual menu. I don't recall other dishes, but first time we were there, they highly recommended to taste the dessert. But the name wasn't even disclosed, and we loved it, and we said, what is it? I mean, can you give us the recipe? The guy said, sure, I can, but then I'll have to kill you. And he didn't let us know what is it, the name, what is it inside. We sort of guessed that it's about date, whatever.
Yeah.
So you're not greedy as this, mate. People can find a lot of free resources on your website. So I'll also share that one.
Thank you. And yes, I had probably the most props in the Nudgestock festival. So I was wearing a lot of different hats, quite literally. And I entertained myself if no one else.
No, definitely. It was very catchy and very to the point. And it's a very condensed, like 9 or 10 minutes, but it tells a lot of your stories, which we will talk about shortly.
My session was pre-recorded, because I needed a mix of live presentations and pre-records. And I think the pre-recording was an advantage because I could edit for time. So I could edit, and 10 minutes was a constraint. And I think one of the interesting things about our behavior is when our options are constrained, we can actually become sharper in how we deliver.
Right.
So I think it worked out really well.
Yeah. It always works, the constraints. So you have degrees in applied psychology, accounting. I mean, this is quite, I must say, unique, right? And this was back in 90s when behavioral economics wasn't so loud. So what inspired you for such a double major?
Yeah, so I studied them at the same time. I think I studied finance or accounting because my parents were teachers and I had no easy access to the business world. And accounting is a skill that you can take into any organisation. So that was a great fundamental. But I also knew that accounting wasn't really going to be my heart's desire. So I thought I was always drawn to psychology and doing a combination. It was actually an arts degree, majoring in psychology with a minor in Japanese. So that sort of gave me, it really rounded out my studies. Had I done only the arts degree or only the business degree, I really wouldn't have felt that my education was comprehensive. But your point about it being a unique combination is true, because I was the only one studying that combination at the time. I think it's possibly become more popular now to do double degrees, but certainly I enjoyed having both streams.
Well, literally quite a right brain and left brain stuff combined.
And that was even down to, I remember enrollment day, and I went through the business faculty and they were very efficient and they treated us as numbers and everything was organised, but they really didn't care who you were. And then I went through the psychology faculty and it was chaotic, but they were all very interested in who we were. So that on enrollment day, I really got a sense of how the two faculties approached education a little bit differently.
Yeah. Well, then your first job was in Coca-Cola, Amatil, right? The bottlers.
Yeah, that's right. So I started
in accounting,
in finance. That's right. So really, that was a bit of a fork in the road actually, because at the same time as getting the job out of university at Coca-Cola, I was actually I qualified for a postgraduate in psychology. So that was the first juncture at which I had to sort of choose which path to take, and I opted at the time to enter the workforce. And so it's been interesting how my career has swung back into psychology anyway. So I think I think it's interesting whenever you have an interest, you end up getting there. It's just the path might be a little bit more, lengthy and windy path, but we ultimately can end up where we would like to be.
And HR learning and development. I was always attracted also, knowing that the workforce is the human resource is the focus for the company. So
yes, it's an interesting one. So I moved from finance into human resources, and I would say the hardest year in my working life was working in human resources, which I know we call it people and culture or something else these days, but I think the HR department is fundamental. I think it's got its own issues. I think it has a perception issue. I don't think it's held in high esteem, and that there are many reasons for that. But I think if you have a well-functioning human resources or people and culture team, it's vital for a workplace. So yes, I moved from finance into human resources, and then I moved to Thomson Reuters. And Thomson Reuters, as I was a product manager or a publisher of human resources books. So I was developing and ultimately selling books for HR professionals to educate them about employment law and all of the bits and pieces around how to engage their workforce, which I really loved.
But where you met behavioral consumer insights at Census white pages.
Yeah,
right?
So from there, in a product management role, after Thomson Reuters, I moved to Census, who were are the publisher of Yellow Pages and White Pages phone directories. And when I was there, phone directories were actually popular and very successful. So the White Pages in Australia was one of the only phone directories in the world to make money because of the way we did things. So that was really interesting. I was there at a time when Google was really just asserting itself, and my role was in a consumer usage role. So I was very much interested in how people were engaging with content and how their behaviour was changing. And at the same time, we'd commission a lot of research on that. We'd do a lot of focus groups on product design, what would make you use the phone book more, that sort of research. And I had so much data or so many information points, but I couldn't get answers on how to change people's behaviour. And that's when I happened to come across a book called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. And that was the crystallization of, I suppose, our shared interest in behavioral economics.
Great. So can you give us an example of what you did differently in White Pages? I mean, what made it like so different than all its peers in the industry?
Oh, White Pages. It seems strange now, but the phone directory, for instance, to stand out with your address listing, if you're a business, you could pay to be bolded, or you could pay to have a highlight. So our advertisers, even though they were alphabetically listed, they would pay money to stand out from their competition. So it was
pretty much like what you do on Google right now. So just you pay to be on top. It's some SEO sort of thing.
Yes, so it was interesting, but of course the model was under a lot of pressure in Yellow Pages, particularly with Google coming in and search moving digital. And it was a case study, and is a case study, I think, on how an industry can be disrupted and how leaders can start to protect their legacy as opposed to really disrupt themselves and innovate, take a hit and repurpose themselves. I always Netflix is a classic example of a business that
Right.
after it not only disrupted Blockbuster, which of course everyone knows, but it disrupted itself when Netflix could see that the market for DVDs was declining and streaming was the way forward. They opted to go backwards before they could go forwards, and many businesses don't. And I think
Right.
it's worth those case studies to really, as a study of how humans can or perhaps refuse to make the right decisions.
So before we move on to your practice, and I wish to learn your perspective on a broader issue, actually, in a moment we'll discuss about how to change behavior, but what creates behavior in the first place?
What a good question. What creates behavior? Well, to a degree, behavior is a default. So we behave naturally. There's a lot of socialization. There's a lot of taking cues, for instance. When we're babies, for instance, we learn how to behave. And that I've never been asked that question before. A lot of it is, I would imagine, not only...
Maybe I can help you with what I have in mind, what I was trying to lead you to. So you need to provide a motivation to people, right? And so you also say reward must be greater than the effort, right? And one of the most known theory is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And how do you see the role of needs in behavior, let's say?
I think the coronavirus has really... And I know Maslow's hierarchy has detractors, but I find it a useful structure to sort of understand where if our base needs are not taken care of, we do, if you like, regress, and we can't move forward if those basic needs for security and shelter and what have you are taken care of. As soon as they're under threat, our higher self-actualizing needs tend to be forgotten. So what was your question regarding that?
I mean, how do you marry the two approaches if you believe in this Maslow's hierarchy of needs? How do you marry that with behavioral economics, cognitive biases? I mean, the way how we perceive the world. So actually, there's also base, and then there's something that sort of manipulates it. So I see the biases are like the manipulations, but there's also the base. So I'm also trying to come up with what makes the base, and that was my question. What is the behavior?
When you say the base, I think I see the cognitive biases as sort of being baked into us. So that is our human wiring. How do we acquire cognitive biases? I think that's a lot to do with our neurological development and how we conserve our energy. And I think, again, socialization and cues from our environment and those sorts of things, they tend to strengthen our cognitive biases. So if you take it back from a physiological perspective, I think humans are wired for the path of least resistance often. And we're trying to, and that's how our cognitive biases either are developed or are reinforced, is that we are trying to make the best of any sort of decision-making situation, given the time, given our energy, given our emotions. And so the connection point with the emotions, for instance, is the research that you might have read about, for instance, with hot state and levels of arousal, for instance, and people making different decisions if they're highly aroused or if they're not. So I guess there's a swirl of activity that goes on below the surface, and behavioural economics for me is really the exploration of what is below the surface. So it's all what is happening unconsciously, and I think it's correcting what has been lots of assumptions around the rational model, the rational decision maker, how people do. There's been an expectation that people weigh decisions that in a way that we've proven have not been the case. So an example that struck me when I was at White Pages, we were in focus groups asking people what would make them use the phone directory more. And people would tell us, well, if you had a schedule of which weeks my recycling bin had to go out for collection on the note strip, that would be helpful, because the book is on the counter. I can flip to it. I can see, well, it's this week or it's next week. And so that is rationalized behavior. But when we observe what people do when it comes to the decision about, do I put my rubbish bin out? What people naturally do is look and see what their neighbours have done.
Okay.
So people walk out on their driveways and they look, okay, so Bob's put his bin out. It must be green waste this week. And so that to me was the frustration of my work in the corporate sector, was we were building our products and our business on the basis of intended behaviour. Yet the natural behaviour was quite different. And there was no research model at the time that bridged that gap. And so when I came across behavioural economics, I said, well, that is it. That is the exploration of everything that people don't say.
Exactly.
And so one of the things, and I know Adam Ferrier was also talking about this at Nudgestock, but for a long time I've written about don't listen to your customer. Don't listen to your customer, because it can really mislead you, because it's not that they are lying to you, it's that they are giving you a rationalized response and an intention. They don't even know what they themselves will do. And so behavioural economics really, I think, fills out a missing link within customer insights.
So when I remember also when I first time I read Thinking Fast and Slow, and all these cognitive biases, and you say, wow, I mean, it's so true. So there are lots of aha moments, and but it's difficult to digest and make it useful. It's like a great Lego set without instructions. So you don't know what to do with it. And so you wrote 22 Minutes to a Better Business back in 2011. The same year Kahneman launched his book. So, and there are great tips there for tackling 18 common business issues, right?
I wrote 22 Minutes to a Better Business when I was still in my job at Census at White Pages, because I'd again come across behavioural economics, and I needed to prove to myself how it could be applied to business issues, because whilst there are great books like Nudge, Predictably Irrational, Thinking Fast and Slow, it's very hard for business people to then say, but how do I apply it to my invoicing? How do I apply it to a customer call? If I'm changing from a face-to-face meeting and I'm giving them a different level of service, how do I have that discussion with a client about it? So that's why I wrote 22 Minutes to a Better Business. I wanted to prove to myself what behavioural economics could do.
Can do, yes.
And also keep it pretty short and sharp. So that's why it's only 22 minutes. And from there I've written some other books, because I wanted to then advance my knowledge and also share some new ideas about how you could apply behavioural economics to work, but also to habits and personal effectiveness.
So, and then latest what you presented in Nudgestock also, you distilled this approach to the Bri's triangle.
Yes. So I had a very original idea of calling it the Williams behaviour change model. So
okay.
Yeah. So
well, that's fair. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's predicated on the basis that, and there are other behavioural frameworks, but a lot of behavioural frameworks are either acronyms, or they're not grounded in the reality of what are you trying to achieve. So it starts, if you draw a triangle, that's pretty much the shape of the model. Down on the bottom left, we've got the letter A, and down the bottom right, we've got the letter B, because ultimately to change, we start with the question of what do I want to get people to do? So how do I get them to move from A to B? That becomes a very important question, because oftentimes in business we leap to wanting to know what we want them to do. So I want them to click, I want them to buy. But we forget to ask ourselves, but what are they doing now? Because only by knowing what they're currently doing do we know the magnitude of the ask, the magnitude of what we're asking them to do. So we start with that exploration, and then it's about identifying and addressing 3 likely barriers. So what's standing between you getting people from point A to point B? The 3 barriers are that they are lazy, they are overwhelmed, and they are scared. So by lazy, what I mean there is we've talked about cognitive biases. Lazy is just that we make decisions on the fly. We make things that are automatic and habitual. So, for instance, if in the days that we could actually drive to work, we would drive to work without actually thinking about how we drove there. Of course, if we started a new job, we'd have to think about it. But most of the time, we're making most of the decisions pretty automatically. So that's Kahneman's concept of system 1 thinking. So that's lazy thinking. So as a business, we need to start from the proposition that people aren't going to be thinking much about what we want them to do. And so we need to come up with strategies to engage them in order to do that. So the second, once we've conquered that issue, and it might not be an issue for some, it's like they're already on board, but then it's about, well, maybe they're stopping for a different reason. So the second barrier is that they might be overwhelmed. So this is when it's the paradox of choice. It means that they might be interested in what we're suggesting, but we're overwhelming them. And so the motivation to act is being drowned out by the complexity of the action. So if we give them too many buttons to choose. So for instance, if we're sending them an email marketing letter, EDM, and we have multiple calls to action in that correspondence, now we've suddenly burdened them with too many decisions rather than just having, for instance, a single call to action. So the sense of overwhelm is something we need to clarify. So that's the second barrier. The third barrier, assuming now they're interested, so apathy or laziness isn't a problem. They know what they need to do, so they're not overwhelmed. So that's not a problem. The third barrier, and the one that's usually unstated, is that they're scared of committing. So this is loss aversion. So they have something more, there's something at stake for them to lose. Now, even if they are clicking a button on your website, they might be nervous about clicking that button. Because if they don't know where the button is taking them, they might not want to commit to that. If they don't know where your payment page is going to take them or whether it's a secure transaction, they're not going to click. And so our proposition there is that we need to give them nothing to fear if they do take the action, but something to fear if they don't. So that's, they'll miss out on the special offer if they don't act now, that sort of thing. So because always what we need to do to get people from point A to point B is overcome their natural inertia. So naturally, it's the status quo bias. We tend to stick with what we know, even if we don't like it. And so we need to be driven in order to change our behaviour. So that's the model. I mean, we'll I'm sure in the show notes put links to where they can find information. But that's conceptually. So this is when I'm talking to clients, this is what I want them to do. Before they tackle any business challenge, whether it's I'm going to write an email or I'm going to do a presentation or I'm going to design a proposal or design a website, they have to draw themselves a triangle, write down what are they currently doing, what do I want them to do, and then almost audit the process. How do I overcome laziness? How do I overcome overwhelm? And how do I overcome any fear that people are holding? And that tends to flush out any reasons that people will resist what you're asking them to do.
Actually, you kind of answered my question. Not all these 3 barriers are valid for everything, for every category, whatever. But I understand that this is if it's a bigger term investment or a bigger investment, let's say that you have to make, you take more, you get from each all of these steps. But what if you sell a chocolate of a chocolate bar of $1.
Yeah.
What do you suggest for your clients who wants to go through your model?
Well,
because $1 is not like a big deal.
well,
Like, why would I be?
So I guess there are a few things. So think about laziness. Laziness is the chocolate bar in the line of sight? Is it easy to access? Because, for instance, there's research, it was done on ice cream, but if the ice cream was in a opaque fridge, people didn't go and buy it. So that's why in supermarkets, if they have it right in the near the cash register, people are more likely to do it. So there's also, when it comes to laziness, a perception of value. So you might think $1 isn't expensive, but if there's a 90-cent chocolate next to it, then you've got an issue. So it's about relative value. When it comes to overwhelm, well, that you are at risk of that. So that's there's a whole array on the shelves. I mean, that's where branding and labeling and marketing and all those sorts of things comes out, how you range your product. And fear, or people being scared, well, there can be a whole lot of baggage and guilt associated with consuming chocolate. So how do we give people the sense that they deserve it?
Right.
It's your little treat. It's not that you're going to break your diet if you have a chocolate. So just by that one example, you can see how you can work through each of those barriers and start to think about what solutions you need in order to shift more product.
Great answer. Thank you. So, and chocolate being a common threat for both of us, as I understand.
Exactly right. You raise a good point, because you're right. The three barriers will or won't happen in some situations. So the discipline is to think each of those barriers through. And even if your answer is, I don't think a sense of overwhelm is a problem, at least you have knocked that out as an issue. That's one point. The second point is, as you are thinking about the sales process, or the process that your customer is going through, different barriers might play out at different times. So naturally, for instance, trying to attract people to your business in the first place, that might be more a laziness issue. Once they're interested or engaged in you, maybe it's then not confusing them with too many of your services or too many of your products. So that's when overwhelm might sort of start to present. Then if they're going down the purchase funnel, they might be really getting nervous about committing to that sale. So you might find also that the different barriers dial up and down according to where the person that you're influencing is in the purchase cycle, or the behavioural change cycle. And I will also say that the model can be used, we've been talking about individuals, you can also use it on groups, or a small issue or a big issue. So you can use it on something like clicking a button, which is a small issue, or you can use the same thinking when it comes to a large issue. So, for instance, I've worked with finance clients in terms of trying to get people to enroll in superannuation, so a larger scale issue. So it's very scalable according to whatever behavioural issue you're facing.
And actually, coming towards the end, I have one more question before the last one. I believe Eastern world has a wisdom, right? I mean, and Turkey is quite can be considered as an Eastern country. I worked at a company for many years, and we had a dealer in the east of Turkey. I was told that when you visit him, he first takes to lunch or dinner, whatever time of the day. I mean, without asking you if you're hungry or whatever, because he didn't want to discuss business matters when you're hungry. So he knew all this, right. The famous judge example, whatever, from the book. And
yes.
And I don't know if you have been to Istanbul, but so in Grand Bazaar, let's say, right? They when you visit there, it's a whole ritual. I mean, they serve you the tea, they serve you the Turkish delight and whatever, all this sunk cost related stuff. So all these, some of these biases, let's say, are well known to the world for many years now. But I still feel companies are not adapting to this right mindset. Why do you think so?
Well, the most obvious response, I suppose, is that people are lazy.
Okay.
And so we're not immune ourselves, to, of course, to these sorts of things. And when I say lazy, I certainly don't mean stupid or
True.
anything of that nature. I really mean that, again, path of least resistance. We tend to, once we're habituated into a process, we tend to stick with that. And so if behavioural science is seen as something new, that can be a difficult thing to sell. So we need to realise that if we're trying to get people to adopt a new behaviour, which, for instance, is taking on behavioural science, integrating behavioural science into their business, we need to overcome laziness, overwhelm, and fear around that. So why is it not being adopted? I think it's really for all of the cognitive biases.
True. My signature question, my final question. What is your formula for creating value?
Well, the model I've described is really, I believe, the path for creating value. Ultimately, it's realizing that in business, our success relies on getting other people to do stuff. So other people meaning our staff, our stakeholders, our investors, and of course our customers. And so if we can do that more effectively, our business results are going to flow from that.
Well, thank you, Bri, so much. And how people can reach you? You have also online courses, right?
I occasionally run webinars and what have you. I do have an idea of online courses, which of course with Corona I may accelerate. But look, I have books and lots of resources on my website. So it's briwilliams.com.au. And people can do things like a behavioural audit of their business for free. They can do a behavioural intelligence test. They can do an inventory of their habits. So there's plenty of stuff to get involved in.
I'll post all the links, including the 22 Minutes to a Better Business, the book. Thank you very much, Bri, for your time. It was a great pleasure to have you in the show.
Thank you for having me along.